Nako jinde akoliye yukinwe judelina yi tobi labado akangamo malapo nyopolina yi tobi Nako jinde akoliye yukinwe judelina yi tobi labado akangamo malapo.
I'm really excited to bring you the upcoming interview with a very special guest. You'll hear him discussing all the great and courageous work that he's currently engaged in. And if you feel inspired to help him continue these efforts, please consider making a donation earmarked for his projects. Or you can give a general donation that will support the wider movement in Myanmar. Our ongoing support has been so very helpful and appreciated by many Burmese struggling during these dark days. Simply go to insightmyanmar.org/donation to contribute today, or stay tuned at the end of the episode to hear more options. Now, let's hear from that guest himself. We're joined on this episode of Insight Myanmar podcast with Htet of Freedom Fighters. And I'm really looking forward to this interview because we have a leader of a nonviolent movement in Myanmar that has continued to this day. We don't hear much about this. We, as our platform, as well as many other media out there, have focused much of the attention on the change at every level, really, of the violent resistance to the military regime and some of the rationale behind this and everything else that comes with this transition. And so this is a very important interview, one that I'm very excited and eager to have in exploring those that have continued on the ground, in the front lines, in a nonviolent resistance and learning what they're doing, why they're doing it, and their rationale and thinking behind. I think we're going to get a lot out of this conversation. Before we get there, we're going to go a bit into, as we often do on these interviews, into the background and personality of our guest, Htet, and learn about how he came, perhaps hesitatingly at times, to this nonviolent movement, which he now very passionately advocates for. We'll learn a bit about his life as well. So Htet, thank you for taking the time to join us and talk about yourself as well as your organization, Freedom Fighters, and the work that you're doing.
Thank you for having me.
So as mentioned, let's get into your story first, your pre-coup life, which must seem like a different world for many of us now. You reference how you graduated from engineering school and then transitioned into very diverse areas: business, finance, education, etc. As for many people, politics and activism for you did not come, as I understand it, until after the military coup. So before we get into how your world changed on February 1st, 2021, tell us a bit about where you came from, how you grew up, what your interests were, so we understand you a bit more.
Yeah, as you introduced, I was like completely away from the politics or the activism field. I somehow interested in the politics before, but mostly I was in the other areas. Like I graduated from engineering university, as you mentioned, and then I changed my career into other sectors like educations and consultations work. Um, Yeah, so before the coup, I was just focusing about educations, and also I was learning about coachings and how to combine coaching into my education's areas. So that was my passion then, and then the coups come. So yeah, in the beginning, like we all are shocked and also at the same time excited that we can be a part of a change. So yeah, we are seeing what we can do at the time. So uh, I joined with some close friends, and then we have a discussions on how we can contribute to the movement, and then yeah, gradually I started involved into this nonviolence movement.
Right. And you described to me before how this journey into nonviolence that it began with skepticism. I think that that's not unusual for when someone is in a situation where there's real oppression and tyranny going on, to think, how can this peaceful, nonviolent, humane way of behaving and being, how can it possibly confront this tyrannical dictatorship? So describe a bit and flesh out your thinking in terms of what shape this skepticism took for you, and what your journey was like to answer some of these doubts and skepticisms that you had.
Yeah, it's like in the early periods of the coup, um, there were lots of massive protests and civil disobedience movement happening, and everyone think that could make a change. But for us, like when we are discussing in a like small groups discussions, we don't know how that will change. Like how many if many people walk on the street, like fill the streets with human, or like if people don't go to office or school, or just shutting down school and hospitals and office can make the reaching change, like the military to back off and go into democracy. We don't just understand about how this could happen, and that's why we asked to people. Most of the people, like at the time, we asked to the movement, some of the prominent influential thinker to the movement, some of the respected people, elders. We asked, and they just give vague answer, like just 2 months holding the CDN movement, we will win. Like other country also has that. But some people suggest to learn about more about non-violence literature, because they don't have also clear ideas. So we try to read books about James Sharp and other non-violence literatures, and then gradually yeah, in the beginning we don't believe in non-violence. We think like maybe armed struggle is better because it's clearly it could make a change. It's clearly seeing very visible, very result oriented. You can just expand your territory. So we just think like simply because we are youth and we want to rebel, and then yeah, and then at the time everyone was like focusing on non-violence. So we think like, okay, we want to see how this could change, what is the success factors, and what is the mechanisms of change. So yeah, we dive into the non-violence literature, we read, we discuss, and also we translate some of the books, and then yeah, gradually that leads to the deeper philosophy of non-violence thinking. So non-violence, like from time to time, like throughout these 3 years, we have seen nonviolence is not just an action. It has a much more deeper thinking and deeper philosophy behind. So that we become interested in nonviolence, and we see there's a important need. It's an essential need in Myanmar to change to its future. So yeah, gradually we believe and also we practice nonviolence um, uh, concepts.
I guess what I'm thinking, my mind is going back to those pivotal moments that you kind of set the scene for, in the imagery of the months after the 2021 coup and the CDM movement, and kind of the hope of what that would bring. And I've spoken to so many people that have so many activists that and leaders who put all their hope into that, some of whom, unlike you and this younger generation, have been in the grassroots advocating for nonviolent resistance for years, if not decades, of their lives, and so have been deeply ingrained kind of in this way of thinking and this thought, including Buddhist monks as well. And what I find really interesting is at this moment where there's this hope that CDM and some of the and not just CDM, but you have these massive nonviolent protests that are happening everywhere, that this could be enough to change the tide. And from the military's response, we see very clearly that their response with overwhelming and brutal force, that this mode is not going to work. And that was kind of the moment right around then that many of whom I spoke to described their transition into resisting in different ways that would sometimes actually be involved in the armed struggle, and sometimes just more of a passive supporter of it, or ideologically understanding why this might be necessary. And so what I find really interesting is going back to your pivot point at that moment with your group, and as you, just like the others, are seeing the way that we're continuing to do things like this, it's not going to work given the response we get from the military. But rather than pivoting in the way that many others did and seeing we need to start looking at how to speak the only language the regime knows, the only thing they'll listen to, instead of pivoting that way, you pivot the way of going deeper into what nonviolent resistance means and how to continue the ideology of nonviolence with perhaps other methods and practices than what was happening then, because of the danger to them. So I wonder if you can, and I'm setting this all up because I'm wondering if you can go back to that moment where so many past guests we've had have described the pivot in the other direction, and you can describe why you did not make that, you did not see things the same way, you did not make the same turn to looking at a justification of why at that moment it was then necessary to resist with force. And instead, you went down a different road of seeing, of perhaps changing the tactics, but doubling down and investing further in the belief in nonviolence.
Well, yeah, at the time everyone was hopeful, and also there are some um, changes happening. Like we can see more solidarity, and also we can see changes in the ideological shift happening in the civic movement in the early days. Uh, we just not believe because we are not very understand. We don't understand about how that will make change, um, and also, yeah, I mean, there are a lot of people walking on the streets, but oftentimes they don't really understand about when we talk, like maybe they have different understanding about, let's say, CDN, or like, let's say, protesting. Everyone taking part, but there's no clear directions of how that will go. So it's more like a hope. I would say there are positive things about hope, and also there are negative things about hope. Like if you are expect things very good and the result is not good, people cannot accept more, and it might trigger them. So yes, a lot of people are very hopeful about the change in the early days of the massive protests and civil disobedience movement. And at the time, we don't have much confidence about that, because of we don't see the change mechanism there. So at the time, we are skeptical, and we try to dive into research and learning the nonviolence literature. So at the time, yeah, people are very hopeful and very confident that that will make change in a very few uh, time frames. Um, Therefore, when the military repressed with the brutal forces, they got shocked and angry, and also thinking that there is no other alternative rather than using with force and violence and arms. So for us at the time, we start diving into the nonviolence thinking. So at the time, we find out that like nonviolence is not just an actions. It is not just about walking, or it's not just about not going. These are like the surface level action. The deeper down, it's about communicating. Nonviolent principle focus on like people can be changed. People, also even organization which is made up of a lot of people, this their heart and their thinking and their stories can be changed. So the key about mobilizing the nonviolence movement is strategically how to change these people's mind. So we are like, there are so many important and also interesting aspects for us at the time. Like we just like that we never think before. So we just before before the coup, we just see protests as like people are just moving on the streets. They are just supporting something, and also other people supporting join the team. So that's it. And if other people, the opposition side agrees, they make some progress. If they don't agree, there are more protests coming. So we just see like this surface level thing. But when you dive into the nonviolence thinking, we see like there's a deeper philosophy behind, and there are lots of things Myanmar need to do, because at the time we also realized that there's different sorts of power that is influencing to people. Like people might think, yes, arms and weapons and bullets can orders and can make obedience and can force people to do something. But we also think there's also larger forces that is shaping us unknowingly in the behind, like how society is construct, how religion is construct, how humans are behave in a and obey each other. So we see like even like military, they have different forms of pillars of supports, like maybe weapons and the soldiers are a part of them, but there's a larger forms of supports the military is built of. So without trying to tackle these pillars, we cannot have a real change, because otherwise there will be just a reactions to the military oppressions, and that reactions might not be the solution, and in worst cases it could also create harms to the people. So that's how we are like, it's not that simple, that there are lots of thinking, and also that at the time lots of people are not really, like after March of 2021, lots of people are not interested in nonviolence. So at the time it is really hard to talk, like even start a conversation about nonviolence. So but gradually, yeah, we are also learning, like nonviolence is a very deep construct and a deep philosophy. And also, if we can see a lots of the, like even all of the human history, the progress is made not by the weapon, but by the exchange of ideas and building a better stories. And then that's how we are kind of like linking this nonviolent philosophy with the history and the philosophy and other thing, and then we are and more confident about it.
And I'm definitely one to agree with you on the power and the importance of communication. That's what this platform is really all about, just the belief and really the passion in being able to sit down, even if virtually, and virtually inviting our listener in to this conversation, to be able to have an exchange of ideas, even when they're wildly and sometimes passionately different, but to be able to sit down and to converse, to talk, to speak, and to learn, not necessarily to change minds. That might happen, not necessarily to find common ground or intersection. That might happen as well. But really just the fundamental belief that change starts with speaking and listening and learning and sharing space, really just sharing space together to be able to understand each other and from there to move on. So I do think that's a very powerful part of what you're talking about doing. And I also want to ask a question. It sounds like you're as you describe your journey on the nonviolent path, it sounds like it might have started with actions, not so much the mentality, but just we're going to show our opinion or our displeasure by gathering in this place with signs or whatever else we do to be able to make our voice known. That's more of an action. And what is the mentality of everyone doing it? Well, people probably have different mentalities and why they go there. But then as you get to that point where that pivot has to happen because the same actions are no longer safe to occur, the military violence, then you start going into the mentality and you describe it as it's a philosophy, it's a way of life, it's an essence of being, it's a deep journey that you're going on. And so describe the nature of this transition of going from carrying out nonviolent actions to really imbibing yourself in the research and the understanding of the nonviolent mentality and ethos and beliefs behind that, which then started to transform you?
Well, yes, nonviolence philosophy transformed me largely, um, mainly in the areas that I how important to exchange of ideas and words and finding the truth together in an open minded way. It's important. Also, like like learning the nonviolence more and more clearly see the change mechanism, even though it's somehow difficult compared to arm resistance. Like the change are more subtle and gentle, and it's happening in the deep down level. But once we start realize the change mechanism, we can see how our actions contributed to the results. Every words, every communication, every thinking, every practice that we make, it matters, and the change are very visible. Um, it's really hard to say from the outside perspective, but after every engagement, I talk with my um, um, my peers, my like other youth from the strike committee, and also there are like people who join to my workshops, nonviolent workshops. I can see their change. I can see their ways of thinking. Maybe not like the way that I'm thinking, but there's a change of ideas, the change of actions, and everything. So I'm very satisfied, I would say, with the journey that I've been doing in the past 3 years, and yeah, that's what I feel good. Another thing is like it's to see more about how I should change myself rather than focusing on something very far away. Nonviolence normally focusing on something very close, like yourself and like your surroundings. So because in nonviolence, everything, like all the means contribute to the end. These are like connected and interdependent. So, like changing yourself and changing the society, it is something interrelated and happening at the same time. So, I try to change somehow to the society, and that change to myself. And these are like I can see clearly. Of course, it is not enough. It's a journey, but still um, like there are a lot. I could also see myself differently. I could also see my the past experience affecting to me, and how I liberated from these also differently. So these are like a lot of um, progress happening both in the individual and also creating impact to the outside. So that's how I feel confident about nonviolence.
So you're saying that following a nonviolent path is not just about bringing your vision and of change to a society at large or an authority and having them change according to your ideas, but it's also about opening yourself up to what kind of interchange and maybe uncomfortable things inside there are to look at, and being a change maker, not just in the sense of the change you inspire in others, but also a change maker in the ever continuing and evolving nature of change that is within. And so that being said, can you describe more specifically maybe one or two ways that you internally have felt that you have started to change in some profound ways by becoming more of a follower of this kind of ideology?
Yeah, first of all, yeah, it's nonviolent is like as you said, like it's not just about changing society, it's changing ourselves. It's happening at the same time. If you see all the nonviolence icon like Gandhi or Martin Luther King or Dawn San Suu Kyi, everyone's they're focusing on their internet change first. That's how that's creating an impact to the society. So that's I feel like that's a kind of one of the principle of nonviolence. Got to start change yourself. For me, I used to be have a very critics, very skeptical very critical. So I try to argue, debate, and also seeing from the negative side. So that's could be like most of the time doing. So I'm also proud of that. I'm doing that. I still doing critics in the like in most of the time, but learning nonviolence could try to make me balance of this criticism, whether and also to try to see about more uh, deeper reflection. So like before the coup also I do criticism and like seeing from the negative perspective, but right now I could, but sometimes it affect to me like it affect to me angry, it affect to me confused, it affect to me kind of trigger negative emotions, and it's really sometimes I just want to give up, like I don't want to talk, I don't want to just leave aside. I don't want to interfere others. So, but here in like when I studying nonviolence and also studying about this middle way concept, then I realized like yeah we can be critical and also we can be compassionate and open to others. So at the same time, these two things are not just um, opposing, but it could be uh, supporting to each other. So that's this kind of mentality changed me a lot, and another thing would be with the in the personal relationship with the families and friends. In the past, also I have lots of like things that I shut down with the families with my families, and then till now I'm still struggling, but I could see how in the past like I try to see like for example if I don't like let's say my dad or like my uncle or someone, I just try to see that as like someone who is trying to oppress me, like someone who is trying to force me to do something. But now I can see more than that, like more than a person. Like there's a different kinds of forces behind. It could be a structural, it could be another intergenerational. So like I can see more deeper compounds and figured out ways to solve about the relationship, also about myself to um, how to be liberate and how to think further. Yeah.
That's really clear. Thank you for that, and I can definitely see how, as one is starting to look at rooting out the brutality of an aggressor and paying ever more attention to the manifestation of that brutality, you can't help but also begin to look at the brutality in yourself, manifested in a very different way. But the unkindness, the insecurities, the impatience, and to also be mindful of how those behaviors are coming and attentive to them. So that's a good picture. So we talked about how few months after the military takeover, there were these massive nonviolent peaceful protests that were occurring up and down Myanmar. And when the military predictably started to kill people in broad daylight, and predictably when the international community did nothing except for issue statements, these types of actions were no longer possible. They were just too dangerous to do. And this is the pivot point we keep going back to of what do you do now? Do you submit to the aggressor? Do you take up an armed movement? Do you drop out and if you have privilege, look for other ways to live your life? Or in your case, do you continue the nonviolent resistance, but have to move in new ways that are still open to you given the situation and context? So I wonder if you can describe those new ways. In the past few years, as far as it's safe to share, can you tell, aside from just learning and discussing yourselves in your group, what nonviolent, peaceful, resistant actions are you actually taking and supporting within the country?
Yeah. So yes, after like military brutal crackdown, lots of people um, think nonviolence it's ended. Um, but for us, we think like there's a lot to do in terms of um, we haven't started much yet. Yes, there are lots of protests. There are peaceful movement. Lots of people join in protests and CDM movement. But we try to see the quality, the essence, and the imagination, the visions, and also how is this um, coalitions work. So in terms of these qualities, we have a lot to improve. The key thing that is missing, I would say, in the nonviolence movement is a whole picture. Um, how these things will make a change. People really hardly understand. I just not saying about like ordinary citizens, the people who are really mobilizing, the leader of the strike committee, the youth, the student groups. Also, they don't have much clear visions about or clear understanding about how that will make change. So like most of the time, I always try to consult with them, and the things that I say repeatedly is like we cannot focus only on the tactical aspects of nonviolence. Like there's a like around 200 methods developed by Gene Shop, and like you can see these and you can pick one and you can do make a slogan and do a campaign. You cannot do like that. Violence need to see a long plan and seen as a journey. You need to see the direction as a map. You need to have a roadmap. So like freedom fighter, we are aiming for that part. Like I try to have a clear roadmap and also preparing the necessary resources to go through this journey, maybe a long journey, most probably. So yeah, we try to, because at that time we cannot convince a lot of people. Like even saying nonviolent is it's trigger and it's not well accepted by the community at the time, like Myanmar community at the time. So we try to focus on convincing to the small groups, small people, like workshops and training, because at the time like there are not lots of people. We can talk like more deeper level, and at the same time we prepare the resources, like we prepare the weapons for this journey. So we try to um, translate books, making resources. Also, that resources are also not just for the other people, also for ourselves inside, because we need to learn deeper. Like because once we start diving into the nonviolent, we see like, oh, this is a very deep concept. It's a very um, sophisticated mechanism things, and like we need to learn more. Like we just know that there is a um, larger space to learn, and and we are somehow interested and enthusiastic about the journey, but still we don't know about nonviolent concept, nonviolent principles. So we are also learning at the time. Like in 2021, we focus on learning, developing, creating resources. So that's how we started.
Right. So that's how you started on that path to prepare resources, to educate yourself, because this is also a journey of interchange, to be able to conduct trainings, try to have conversations and communications with those that have the same goal, but maybe different methods and approaches, and try to see where you can come together. That's challenging, obviously, because as you say, people don't really want to hear about nonviolence when their friends and brothers and sisters and family members are getting arrested and killed and raped. It's hard to have that conversation then, understandably. But at this time, this is where you start to develop yourself. And now, as we look at a couple years after that point, and the continued resistance at every level that we've seen to the military regime. As far as it's safe to share, can you give any more detail about the actual activities and tactics that your team has been carrying out or supporting or promoting or anything like that? As far as it's as obviously the playing field is very limited given what the brutality of the military, but where have you found gaps and places where your kinds of methods are able to be enacted?
Yes, well, I agree that like the space to do the right actions are limited because of the military brutality. But actually, there's in deep down there are lots to be done, and most of the people don't pay much attention or overlook these aspects of nonviolence change. So we are trying to fill that gap. For example, like we don't have Most of the time, I would say like the most of the time, lots of people are thinking about focusing on military and the weapons and the soldiers. But for us, we try to see the deeper mechanism, like the religion, the education system, and how the society belief is constructs. So it takes more time, and also it takes a larger preparations to do that. So we are trying to convince others, at the same time we are trying to prepare for that journey. So we say we are quite confident, doesn't mean we have like full understanding and full confidence,
Mhm.
full like certainty about that. So we still try to figure out, and also we have lots of debate about how nonviolence um, play in a predominant and violence movement is coming. So yeah, so that are the things we have done. Though our activities, like in 2021, we started a campaign called like about peace walk. So it's just a walking with wearing white shirts. It's in December we do that campaign for a few days, and then we we figured out we are not enough. That's we are not enough to mobilize yet. We don't have um, we don't have preparation yet, like thinking about how to mitigate the risks, how to educate the people, how to create the organizer, how to create the disorganizer uh, uh, people to because we need to gently navigate the nonviolence action. We cannot just like convincing people to go out to the street. That is not practical. And also we don't have preparation yet about the future visions and the future roadmaps of how we want to change each of the structural compound structural injustice, like as I said, in different sectors. So from that time, like starting from 2020, we focus more on the changing the inner aspects and preparing for that journey. Um, so in 2022, we focus on dialogues because like we start to understand that like um, if we don't know how to communicate each other, we have no other choice but to use force and violence.
Mhm.
So we started a dialogue platforms. Like most of the time when we say dialogue, people are totally against it, like because they think like it's about dialogue between like SACs and like revolution
Mhm.
force. But what matters at the moment or even now is like we need to have dialogue in between the people who want to make change, who want to have a real new story. That's how we start these dialogue sessions from 2022 called Four Corners. So we try to invite different opinions, different backgrounds, and even also inviting everyone to speak up what they believe without interference. So that's how we started Four Corners, and we are very proud of what we have done a lot, because in the revolution, like what makes like in the Spring Revolution is like it's clearly creating a like um, even like creating little space people to engage in dialogue, but more into supporting each other, agreeing and fighting each other. So like it's forming there's a forms of polarization effects, there's a forms of censorship even in medias and mainstreams narrative. So we try to fill that gap, try to create debates and discussions um, for the like mainly targeting for the people who are in the revolution. Like for example, like in the CDM case, we try to create lots of criticism, and also we try to have dialogues for that repeatedly in 2022, because like lots of people thinking CDN is like very noble thing. It's a peaceful, non-violence. Everything is good. Like you cannot argue. Like it's only failed because military oppressed. But the thing is like if we just try to blame military, that means we are giving all of our responsibility, all of our agency to the military, and we don't know what to do. So like in CDM also there are lots of things to considerate and to think, like the especially relating with the education sectors, like creating a divisive effect. So that these are the things we try to facilitate and engage. There are more than the, like, for example, like sanctions and everything. Like, there are also at the time lots of people, lots of strike committee, they want to, like, I think GSCB trying to promote the comprehensive economic sanction. We try to engage that conversation, and fortunately they back off. And then also other ideas, like, because like people are very uh, like seeing lots of oppressions and brutalities and killings, and it's understandable they want to do something. But the thing is, they need to also listen the different aspects and hearing the different arguments, so that they need to have a more nuanced and more sustainable strategy. So that part we are supporting mostly. Also, we create training, like this is also main activity. Like, we have nonviolence training, we call cater training. So we try to teach nonviolent aspects and how to mobilize and convince in a strategic way. And also we give some aspects of principle, but not largely, because like principle, it's very difficult one. It's like the principle nonviolent. So we try to focus on strategic aspect, how nonviolent can change. So like this kind of like research-based, database thing. So yeah, interestingly, like lots of like youths who are outside of who have no background in politics are interested in our training mostly. And also like people in the armed resistance, the youths in the armed resistance, they are also interested
Mm.
about our training. So we are very happy to have to facilitate and to create dialogue among us. So yeah, so that's our training things. Yeah, most of the other thing also we have other forms of regular dialogue sections with other stakeholders to discuss and think about that. So I think in 2022 until 2023, our main focus is on the creating dialogues, idea exchange, and also preparing for the long journey. Yeah.
Mm. Right. There's a lot of important points in there. And I, some of the questions I have coming up, I just kind of want to give a grounding. I understand these are hard questions, and maybe I'm going to be a little bit hard on you, but I also want to put that in context that this is kind of the same grilling and the same hard discussion that we have also given in a different way towards those who have gone the arm resistance side of, and in the spirit of a dynamic and compelling conversation in which we all grow. Often this doesn't happen without taking chances in the kind of things that we share and the kind of things that we ask, even when they could be uncomfortable or really kind of delving into some of the deeper, more sensitive aspects. And that's exactly what we've done in the conversations with those who have decided to take up arms or support the armed side of the resistance, to really dig into that thinking, both conceptually as well as emotionally, what that journey has been like, even when it goes to hard places, and trying to understand that reality. And so also I want to do the same. I want to give the same treatment to those who have gone the nonviolent route, and really looking at the common criticisms, the common concerns, and to someone as yourself who has embedded yourself so much in this way of thinking, to know those responses. And so the first question I have kind of towards that end of getting a bit harder and digging a bit deeper into this is that, there was something of a concern and a criticism in the first year after the coup, where when when the arm resistance started, and when uh, the people looked at a different way to resist, there were a lot of outside observers that were really moralizing and really saying, really kind of talking down to and saying, they were in a place of privilege, they were in a place of safety, and really telling those who didn't have any of this what they should and shouldn't be doing. And those kind of nonviolent messages were really uncomfortable for many to hear. That this kind of moralizing from a place of privilege and safety of how people should be leading the movement that were actually on the ground. But I believe it was Gandhi who said, if you get hit, if they're hitting you, let them hit you in the front and not the back. And that was kind of a way to indicate the fearlessness and the courage of those who were holding nonviolence, that this is how they needed to approach that brutality. That was the kind of the kind of fearless stance of where they take this ideology. And so I think a question that many listeners would have, of those of you who are advocating and developing these strategies for nonviolence, to whatever degree you can answer this safely without putting anyone at risk, but to what degree is this being enacted by people who are away from the conflict and are conceptualizing this in their own place of safety, and to what degree is this being followed by people who are really in harm's way, to take that famous quote, and are facing the brutality in the front and not the back?
Yes, I understand this is an important question. Like also there's important question to divide the line, I would say, because like the outside information is also needed. The outside knowledge, the global knowledge are important, because like everything is associated and we need to learn and inspire, and we need to engage and help each other. So this is important part. But at the same time also, like there is I think it is also important to understand the privilege that we have. Like normally, yes, true, nonviolence, especially the organizers, most of the organizers coming from the privileged backgrounds. Uh, because to be a nonviolent, you need to have a very secure and stable pathway to build yourself first. Because nonviolence needs a lot of internal strength, and you need to build before you go into battle, like you go into resistant movement. So you can see a lot of people coming from like everyone, like Gandhi, Martin Luther King, Aung San Suu Kyi, and Nelson Mandela, everyone coming from a very elite background. So like they have privilege, and that's why like they can build their inner peace, the inner stabilities, and then they can deliver to the outside world. So that's an important aspect to understand our privilege. And like for example, like a person born in the war areas, a child like who has struggles to be educated, to have proper education, proper food, proper security, like it's really hard for them to think about like nonviolent idea change, like communication, dialogue. It's really hard for them to imagine. It's impractical. So we need to really understand our privilege, the difference, the contextual background, the nuance. It is and we need to communicate with paying these uh, details. But on the other hand, that doesn't mean like also Myanmar have like two extreme. That's why we are advocating middle way, because on one hand it is not right to be educated from like outside or more privileged background to do what to do, but at the same time we just need to like abandon, and like we have like this xenophobia background, like we want to just abandon everyone saying from outside, everyone saying from foreign backgrounds. Like we have this like these two extremes are supporting each other, I would say. So we need to have a very middle approach to see what is the best way. So the problem with the outside lecturing is like, because I think there is a power difference there, the privilege and the power difference. It's not very visible in the individual level per se, but it's very clearly visible in the whole structural compound, because like most of the revolutionary forces, like you can see the media, the NGO, the CSO, like even the people who are going abroad, like lots of the mainstream movement, they are staying right now like in the diaspora. So they have to rely a lot on the international community, like whether agreed or not. So there's a power difference there. Like the international community can speak, like even like for example, a foreigners and like the local person, a foreigner can speak more effectively to the international community. So there's a like expectations and power adjustment there. That's why I see a lot of scholars and a lot of like people in the activist background, they don't agree about non-violence movement, but they cannot debate with the outsiders. They just they just agreed and shake their hand um, uh, when they meeting with the international people. But when they meeting with the local, they say like they don't know our context. That's why we cannot accept what they say. So there is no proper dialogue happening. There's just one side and just ignoring each other. So in the surface, they try to be polite and correct and like agreeing everything. But in what happening really in the media and in all these sectors, people are really don't care or really believe much in the nonviolence the way that most of the global people thinking. So this is like this divergence is also harming, I would say, because there is no proper communication between these two. Like for me, like we need to somehow classify the identity because we need to see the difference, to understand the difference, to have so that we can properly communicate. But the thing is, this identity should not be a way to shut down our voices, to have to forming a barrier between these different communities, and we cannot have this um, exchange of idea properly. So that's, we need to think more about like how this the power play a role in these things, and how can we try to reduce the role of power and more focus on how we can exchange truths that matters the most to us.
hmm Another thing I want to follow up on is when you've been several times now, you've referenced the names of different nonviolent activists, Martin Luther King Jr., Mandela, Gandhi, and you've also included Aung San Suu Kyi in that. And so I want to get your read on how you see her legacy, because I think if we were talking in, I don't know, 2005, and Aung San Suu Kyi was referenced as one of the great human rights and nonviolent icons, I think that you wouldn't get much argument in that. But if you're talking, if you're holding Aung San Suu Kyi in that light after, say, 2018, when we're looking at especially her relation to the Myanmar military, to the Rohingya genocide. I know there's a lot of nuance here. There's a lot of people who have, everyone has their own Aung San Suu Kyi theory as to why she did what she did, and then others saying no, that's, you're being an apologist, and come down with more kind of moral fundamentalism. And that's, I don't want to go into those debates because we can go way into the weeds if we start going in that direction. But it's more that just in a general sense, I'm just curious if, because you've referenced her several times, do you hold her in that same light as this kind of paradigm of a figure who is in that same light as being a nonviolent actor in the mode that you find yourself training in?
um Again, that's also, yeah, that's also depends. Like for me, I try to see people and their thoughts and their actions differently. Even like it's not this is how the middle ways work. It's not just try to label a person as a like
hmm
black or white. Try to see the nuance, like try to see the degree behind, like which aspect is good, which aspect that we can inspire, which aspect we need to care for, which aspect we can learn the lesson. So about Aung San Suu Kyi, it's still relevant to the current revolution, I would say, because like a lot of the revolution actors coming from these like NLD backgrounds. So these are like a lot of them get supported from the people, like they get popular support till now because of Aung San Suu Kyi influential power. That's why they need to put Aung San Suu Kyi in the lots of their official description, like a state councillor still. So this is quite still, Aung San Suu Kyi has been a public icon, maybe not in the international icon yet, but still a public icon in the Myanmar community, and a lot of people supporting the current mainstream movement leaders due to association with her. So still there are like debates about these things. But okay, and then about Aung San Suu Kyi thing is like, I think she is a nonviolent activist. Like she like in general, the principle, the understanding, the fear non fear concept. These are all important aspects of nonviolence, and she has been standing that for decades without changing her mind, and I think she will still continue. But the problem comes when she get in power. So that is also kind of unpredicted journey for her. In my analyze, in my opinion, she didn't have enough preparation to recruit. Also, she tried to change from that time when she got in power from a non-violent activist to a leader of a country, like a more like a
hmm
government official. So
hmm
that power difference shift her a lot. So that's why in non-violence, this power plays a very important role. Like when you get, especially when you get in power, people change. So um, and not just her herself change, the people surrounding change also. Like there is no arguments, there is no debate, check and balance of power. So it's forming another forms of concentrations and check power on her, and that make her blinded. It's not just for her. I mean, and check power always leads to blindness and making evil thing, maybe with good intention, but leading to evil things. So I think so. There's a turning point there when someone get in power, that non-violence journey could be deviated. Maybe because of harm, maybe because of surrounding, or like or both. So um, that's what we feel like, because like Aung San Suu Kyi also don't like about like student protests. She don't like about the
Mm.
ethnic groups revolution. So that's
Mhm.
somehow the narrative has like changing, like not just in the
Mhm.
Rohingya case, a lot of the case she changed, maybe because maybe she want a quick solution, like
Mhm.
because of her age, she want to bring like more, like because of like using force and using power is seen quick most of the time, like like dialogue and non-violent, you need to make people understand, like
Mhm.
comprehend these things. It takes normally a longer journey non-violent, like
Mhm.
power seems quick, but most of the time this
Yeah.
quick has a side effect, like it could draw back easily, like what's happening now. So that's a
Mhm.
lesson that we could learn from this revolution, like new actors. Also, like
Mhm.
the power plays a very important role. Like people may have good intention, I would say, like everyone starting with a good intention, like Aung San Suu Kyi, even like military leader, they start with like good intention to build this country. Even right now, they may have this contention, but I think when people get power, the change happening. That's why that's a lesson. I mean, Aung San Suu Kyi for me is a kind of like some lesson and some inspirations. At the same
Mhm.
time, it's somehow a path. Um, I mean, it needs to be a path in a few decades. So um, the most important thing is like what lesson we can learn from her. So that's how I approach her.
Mm. So, looking back on the years of resistance before this current moment, one of the in the different interviews we've done on this platform, as well as reading through some of the um, different books that have covered that. I'm thinking of like Delphine Schrank and Elliot Presse Freeman in particular, and some of the work they've done in cataloging these grassroots efforts. One of the things I've learned from talking to them and from reading their books is that for many activists, nonviolence was, and speaking to those activists themselves as well, and from their own voice, nonviolence was not so much something that was taken up in previous years for ideological reasons. It was more taken for practical reasons. It was more like this sense of there is, for the current climate, for the current conditions, the strength of the military, the divisions among the different ethnic groups, the political awakening of the different activists, and the will to endure the conflict and everything else, that a violent rebellion or revolution against the military in previous years, it simply wouldn't work. It just wasn't a good plan. If you want to overthrow this regime, this is not the way to do it. And so many that I've spoken to, and some of the scholarship that I've read on it has described that their nonviolent activism, or sometimes their activism, you can say, in sometimes like supernatural fields, like cursing rituals, or looking at like past lives or other realms or things like that, that these were really creative ways and innovative ways to show resistance, and continue the movement without being annihilated by this really brutal, awful regime that wouldn't think twice about imprisoning or killing someone. And it was a way to keep that resistance alive. And as it's been explained to me, the conditions have changed since 2021. The conditions have changed, and this is now the new strategy that we need to adopt in order to finally make this turn and overthrow this regime. And some activists have described a very painful transition to realizing that they had to let go of their nonviolent ways, because they came to realize this is the only way we can really succeed in the end. While others, it wasn't so much the case. They said, look, we were doing nonviolent activism for years, for decades, because this was the smartest thing to do in that moment. But the conditions changed, and now this is what we need. This is the path we need to follow in order to get where we want to go. The destination has never changed, and it's never been about an ideological method. or an ideology for how we get there. It's just the most practical way. And before, nonviolence was more practical. Now armed struggle is more practical. And so I wonder if you can speak to your understanding of, and I know this is not, I don't want to pretend this is monolithic or generalize it too much, that there's a lot of shades of this, but I wonder if you could speak to your understanding of how you would characterize some of the nonviolent actors and grassroots efforts in previous years and decades, and how you might contrast that, or how that might be integrated into the kind of nonviolent training and methodology that you have been undertaking these last few years.
So like in the past 3 years, like lots of people, as you mentioned, changed their nonviolence activism into armed struggle because of practicability, maybe. Um, I think that is understandable. Seeing the brutal oppressions, but more than that, it's also understandable because the societal um, thinking also changed. Like maybe that's a prime reason I would say, because one of the one of the advantage that I have is like I am outside of this political and activism field. So most of the time the activists work in a groups in a solidarity way, so they need to respect each other, they need to bring other people aspects. So when the whole the collective thinking change, they got to change. So this is how, that's what I feel like when I talk to lots of activists. They know that there's a problem with armed resistance. They know that there needs to be more strategic non-violence, but they need to follow with the trends. They need to follow with what other people are doing. So that's why I see lots of non-violent action previously in the past 3 years focus on like tactical and campaigning on setting day and setting date on setting actions, but they cannot focus more on like deeper or longer strategy or coalition forming. So that's one thing that I see about like people who are still saying like we are still standing on non-violence, but we are also supporting to armed resistance. Like a lot of the mainstream movement right now, people say like we have like I read an article called like total resistance. We have to combine armed resistance and civil resistance. A lot of scholars, activists support that approach. So that's, but for me, when I see that approach, is like a it's not purely non-violent. It's non-violence in action. Maybe like when you protest, when you make slogans, when you think, and when you put weapons, it could be arm resistant. But the thing is, that if there is no clear mechanisms of change, and when you are, you say you are like non-violence, but you are like at the same time like affiliating with arm resistance, that's in literature or in philosophically, it's really hard to see non-violent. It's a non-violence action, but in supporting to arm resistance. It's a branch of the arm resistance, I would say, like a communication team of arm resistance. So like yes, about the particularity question, like I saw a lot of people saying because of this like the end justify the mean thinking, like because of this we got to change the approach because the arm resistance is more critical. But the thing is, I want to really engage about or questions about what this practicality means. Like practicality means like you can harm more people, like you can kill like more people, or you can expand the territory, or like is that what the result mean? What practical results mean? Because from arm resistance, you can make more arms, you can kill more people, you can gain some territory, you can build power based on this ability to violence. But is that the end, or is that the future that we want to create? Because if like a lot if people are focusing on these things only, what like we can create like some kinds of territorial, like in the ethnic armed groups, like ethnic armed groups are working really hard, but like still they are struggling with forming some new dictatorships in their themselves. So I don't know what's the like I think we need to like question about this practicality means. Yes, nonviolence. It's understandably difficult to think the mechanism of change. So people might think it's not practical. But the thing is like we try to see the actor these days, like arm resistant. When we try to see arm resistant, like this is about the battle between SAC and other revolutionary actors. But we need to really careful understand about this. SAC or even every political organization is built up upon the society um, involvement with, because society is forming at the base, like the people, the community are the base, and that's supporting these things, and that's why these are the enablers of this dictatorships and this militarism happening in Myanmar. Because these armed groups like or the SAC is not coming from the outside; it's coming from the insides, and and it's coming from the support of the ordinary people, and still continuing support in the right or indirect way. So without changing these root cause, we can somehow take some of the leaves, some of the we can destroy some of the branches, but still the roots will stay growing, and then the overall conflicts and dictatorship thinking will still continue in Myanmar. So like, I mean, um, yeah, it is understandable on one hand about people saying practicality, like it is very visible that the war, like these say every news are filled with the wars news, like how many people get killed or how many people get shoot, how what territory gained. So people focus on like these things. That's understandable. This is something like when we call about ideas, when we talk about um, ideological and philosophical, and then this non-violent concept. People think like there's a, like the ideologies and practice are like the practical results are two different things. So that's something I would like to argue. That's not like ideological and practical. They need to be interrelated. Like in the like in Buddhist literature, the Eight Noble Paths, it starts with the right views, because you cannot start with the action because you don't know whether it's right or wrong. You don't even know what result you can bring. You don't even know what kinds of roadmap you're doing. Now you're just doing because most of the narrative that I see in the mainstream movement, people thinking like because they don't choose armed resistance, the military make them to choose. They want to choose non-violence. So like this is also giving agency to the military, because military let we because this is not our choice. That this is what interesting about armed resistance and this debate about non-violence and practicality. Like people don't want to choose armed resistance. That things we can agree upon that. But the thing is
Uh-huh.
like, what do we understand about non-violence movement that might be different? Most of the time, people focus on actions. Like we have done most of the people think like we done everything. Like we like because they see the people on the street, the people not going to office in the CDN movement, so they know that this is the limit. They know this. They think that's a maximum limits having reached, and military didn't back off. So like they need to have a far more a different way, like the arm resistance. So I just want to reflect back to the non-violence, and then there's a deeper ways of doing the non-violence. And if we can think about that, if we can see that the ways it's doing, we can see its practicality also.
Yeah, that what you said actually brings up a direct conversation I had with a longtime nonviolent activist. I think maybe 4 or 5 months after the coup, and is one of the things that stands out in the whole history of this platform is at one point him just um, kind of up in arms saying like, look, we've tried this, we've tried this, we've tried this, we've tried this. If there's something we haven't tried, please, international community, tell us what that is. Tell us, do you think that we want to do this? Do you think that we enjoy doing this? Like, of course not. But if there's something we don't know about and we haven't tried, tell us what that is. And he, for the life of him, he couldn't figure out what was left, and that's why he made that transition. um, I also want to ask a question, and you already kind of touched upon this in your last answer, and so I want to segue into referencing what you said, and then opening it up to a wider question. And what I was going to ask was about if you saw what you were doing in terms of the nonviolent actions as kind of one arm of many in the resistance to the military, that you're doing your part and the armed resistance is doing their part, and then there's CDM, and then there's NUG, and then there's NUCC, and then there's the EAOs, and kind of on, and that all of these are kind of are in their own way operating in their own direction, and together it's going each in their own way, each person, each movement in their own way is going to affect an overall change and an overall resistance that maybe together will be enough to topple the military. And I wanted to know if you saw this as kind of one of the methods coexisting with these other methods, or if you saw what you were doing in contrast, or even contradiction, or even conflict to these other ways of resistance. And in your answer, you seem to indicate that you don't see these as going in line together. You mentioned that historically and academics have referenced that um, that these things can't really be aligned. They really need to be more pure in the orientation and methodology being done. So can you open up that answer and give your response to the question of, can this be one method of many that will all kind of work in its own way to achieve the result that we see? Or do you really see what you're doing in contrast and even in conflict to those other methods that are not nonviolent?
Well, it's really hard to generalize this question, but I'll try.
Hmm.
I would say, um, for us, what we understand about revolution or radical change is different with reactions, uh, or or explosion and resistant only. So resistant, like, it's about coming from the oppression. So we want to resist that. We don't want that. So, and we have pain and hatred and anger, and so that's why that's explode, and we try to react on that part. So most of the movements that we are trying to criticize and try to argue is that we need to shift from this reactive thinking to more proactive and more revolutionary thinking, in a way like we need to see the deep down level. So yes, like there are some. Most of the time, we are not really supporting much about the surface level action, like the tactical planning, the tactical method, tactical action. We don't engage much in these things, even though we think that's important. But without linking with the strategy and larger aim, these are just like Sun Tzu said, it could only be a noise and distraction only. So. Um, so on that area, we are different with maybe lots of people thinking. But there are many other things that we are supporting, like for example, like some of the strike committee, they try to make a campaign about there is no union yet. So these kinds of campaigns are focusing on the um, deep down the radical structure of from Myanmar. So we try to support these kinds of we think these are in line with our ambition. Some of the people try to change Buddhism, like try to create conversations about what are the construct of the current Buddhism existence and how we can imagine a better future. So that kinds of things, we think we are in line and we are supporting, and we are more eager to work together, like Inside Myanmar is doing also. Um, yeah, also like also there are also what we see about the right action is not just about protest, or like um not just about CDM, but there are many ways that even inside, like people on the ground doing without using the name revolutions. Like there are people who are trying to create some kinds of grassroots movement about education on the disadvantaged people. There are people who are still doing about the women rights in the country and labor rights in the country. So these are also, I think, we are also alive. But for the mainstream movements, we are not thinking as a like opposition. Of course, in non-violence there is no anti-movement. We don't, also, like as you mentioned, like everyone is trying to abolish military. Like, but here also, what we want to like we don't want to disrupt military. We want to create a new story that is better for military and also for the rest of the community. So that part, like some of the narrative we agreed on, some of the agreed that's like conflicting with our ideas, like for example, like the narrative focusing on um like about the battles and how many people get died and seeing this as a result of achievement. For that, that's not a real achievement. So these kinds of things, we have different thinking, but different doesn't mean like we are open to everyone. So like we want to collaborate, we want to engage dialogues or conversation with anyone, including military. So like all the revolutionary forces, we are open to work together, but still there are different lines of thinking we have.
Mm, mhm. Another hard question, I would say, to preface it, that I'm sure you get asked a lot. It's one of the most common criticisms that can be launched about looking at nonviolence in a place like Myanmar, is that in looking at the historical examples, one will look at, like, in the civil rights movement in America, Martin Luther King Jr. He was really using the advantages of publicity and showing and instigating and then showing the real brutality and racism, the way it was manifested towards blacks, and that was able to be picked up by a free press and shown to white people everywhere, and make them disgusted about what was happening in their own country. Or you look at Gandhi in India, and he was also able to use the kind of colonial British thinking against them in showing how they were violating the principles of their own society, and to set up situations where the discrimination, the brutality, the racism that Indians were facing, that became known in England, and progressive communities and activists in England and in the West were able to understand the movement that Gandhi was pushing. And and the contrast with this is obviously like, well, this would probably not work in Nazi Germany. This would probably not work in Imperial Japan. It would not work in North Korea today. And the Burmese military state is a similar example to these others. There were nonviolent resistors to Hitler's Germany, and it obviously didn't work. There were also armed resistance that didn't internal rebellions and revolts against what Hitler was doing, that obviously didn't work as well. Uh, but I remember as well, one of the most listened to interviews we've ever had was with Bhikkhu Bodhi, who's is an American Buddhist monk, one of the most respected Buddhist scholars living today. And at one point in the interview, he said, "What I would like to see and what I would suggest is that hundreds of monks come and sit before a government building, and they just sit in meditation. They just sit in chanting metta, or in meditation, just a silent protest that is showing dissent to the military." And I said, "Well, that's a really nice idea, but in reality, if that happened, then you would just see them all brutally killed and arrested, either in broad daylight or once night fell." We saw that movie before at Saffron Revolution. And so this very nice idea you have about the possibility of a nonviolent resistance involving these monks, this is a regime without any humanity. This is not 19 early 20th century England, or mid 20th century America. This is a different kind of society, and these actions, which are speaking to their humanity, as in Nazi Germany or other totalitarian states, there is not necessarily this humanity to speak to. This society is ordered in a different way. And so one of the common criticisms of the possibility of really embracing a complete nonviolent resistance post coup in Myanmar is that there's no humanity that you're going to awaken. You're just going to um, you're just going to provoke murders and arrests and rapes and everything else, and they're just going to keep going over bodies until there's no more bodies to put in front of them. What worked in the civil rights movement or in colonial India is not going to work here. So I'm sure you've heard that argument many times before, and I wonder how you think about that and respond to it.
Yes, I hear that quite a lot of time, and again, it is understandable to think that way, and it is like, yes, but in my defense, I would say, I would like to argue that there are always, um, first of all, like, every person in power, maybe individually or institutionally, they want to continue the power, so they will use whatever ways they think fits. Also, they can use to defend their power. So that's how the power dynamics work. And then, yes, it is true that like it will be difficult to do like civil resistance movement and violence movement in Nazi Germany. but also it is also difficult in like all the people, as you mentioned, like British colonial or like other country. If we see on the if we see on the deeper history, like there are lots of brutality also happening in British colony. Also, they make a lots of genocides, um, brutal oppressions, whatever they can. So in the United States also, they make a lots of repressions and like um, um, yeah. So it is like it is always this is like a general response of the dictator or people in power to protect their seats. And it is like try to compare like British colonial. It's like very innocent, very um, um, like good, like well treated. It's also misrepresenting of the history, so they make also very evil things. um, but the thing is, but there's a way of progress. There's a very long timeline to change that things in a gradual way. Like for Gandhi, he need to take like for decades. The same for civil resistance movement, like like in the civil right movement in the United States, it takes for decades. Like also that movement need to be built upon the other types of movements. So like 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 it is it is I would say it is not right to be thinking like the dictatorship, the way they are doing the way their oppression is like deterministic, that people have no room to do non-violence. Instead, we need to have a plan. Maybe it takes a longer way to see what are the ingredients needed, what are the necessary preparation for that. Then we can create from that, we can create like a gradual approach. So for us, we think like we need a very critical and radical vision. But when we go into there, we need to be very moderate. We need to think of a step-by-step approach. So like a gradual ways. So every movement, like civil rights movements and power to the LGBT movement in the United States, these are all interconnected. Like for example, people in the like 19th century or after the World War II, they might not think like they're like a person, an LGBT in the United States also facing a severe oppression. They don't have ways to stop it. But gradually, in the next, let's say, 60 years, they can change significantly. So that's a power of human communications and sustained actions. For Myanmar, yes, it is understandable. People say like it is not just about the coup. It is 70 years long institution. But for me, it is longer than that. This narrative of like using violence and military as a way to create this country, as a way to unite people, as a way to build the like religion, Buddhism. Like everything start with violence in this country, and this tradition coming not just like 70 years ago. It's coming from the began age from the first Myanmar kingdom story. So these stories are like
Sure.
interconnected and still using by military and still accepting by the majority of the people. So
Mhm.
these are the root cause that creating this belief that only forces is the solution, and only seeing people as a black or white, like every people in the military must be black, therefore we are all white. So this kinds of
Mhm.
black and white thinking creating an extreme conflicts. And also these extreme forces are in the surface, it seems they are fighting each other, but in the deep down, they are supporting each other, so that we cannot create a middle
Mhm.
way to have a sustained action. So, so like yeah, we cannot think like this is the point that I feel kind of like I feel difference with lots of people thinking. It's like they
Mhm.
focus on military. For me, it's yeah, military is a part of the problem, but it is not
Mhm.
the root cause yet. There's a deeper root cause there, and to change that, we need to have a yes, we need to have a clear vision and a sustained strategy and a gradual action to build what are the necessary action, so that I sincerely hope that kinds of leadership, that kinds of movement will emerge, and then that will create a progressive. Like progressive mean like we can reach a perfect solution, perfect future, but we have a way to do a better future. So that should be the nonviolence ways work, and it could work in any regime. It seems difficult because of the limitation here these days, but if we see for like the longer time frame, like there are a lot we can do.
That's a very powerful answer. Thank you for that. And I want to pick up on a couple of themes. You talk about the long frame. You speak a lot about long frame and short frame, and this, and really emphasizing this being a long journey rather than kind of a quick fix of force. And so I want to look at that relationship, and I also want to look at some of the historical precedents that we keep talking about and flesh those out in some more detail. So let me let me give some context first. I just want to give some forewarning that there's a bit of context I want to cover. So I'll talk for just a moment about some of these historical examples I want to give and describe those in details, and then turn the question over to you to get your analysis and your take on this and looking at these relationships. So historically, nonviolent movements, such as ones we've been talking about, the civil rights movement in the US, the anti-apartheid movement in South Africa, we can also throw in the Irish non-cooperation movement. Historically, these have been shown to succeed through some combination of violent and nonviolent means. To give some examples, the US saw various armed black resistance groups fighting back against like the KKK with firearms, and leaders such as James Foreman, who led protesters to take on police forces with fists and rocks during the famous marches to Selma and Montgomery. In one case, there were even 2,000 people that were led to march to the Montgomery courthouse. And it was so impactful that it's been said by some historians that Montgomery city officials met with Foreman and Martin Luther King Jr. to discuss coordination and future protests in response to the fear that violence of protesters had been instilled with them. South Africa, if we take this one, it saw not only these international boycotts and sanctions, but there was also an armed insurrection. And Mandela himself, he founded a wing of the ANC. Some people would say it was a paramilitary wing. Some people even said terrorist at the time. It carried out bombings, torture, extrajudicial killings regularly. If we go to the Irish non-cooperation movement, this coincided with the Irish Civil War. It was an armed conflict that eventually pushed the British out of most of Ireland. And indeed, even if we look at nonviolent movements which succeeded independent of organized violence, and for this we could take Gandhi's non-cooperation movement, it succeeded not through appeals to reason and rational argumentation, some people would say, but through artificially imposing economic burdens on the authorities that rendered a given enterprise non-viable, and often attracted spates of violence in addition to that. So in the years since their successes, there has been a narrative that's been formed, some would argue again, that emphasizes the power of nonviolent resistance, both to dissuade the populace from turning to violence in the future, and also to kind of whitewash the authorities, give them an excuse or a way out, the authorities of the day, to not be seen as caving in to the threat of force or bankruptcy, but as rational actors that their better angels came out. They were swayed by nonviolent, reasoned arguments. At the same time, there's also historical examples of unilaterally nonviolent resistance movements that have not succeeded. We can take the Prague Spring of 1968, or the March 1st movement in Korea in 1919, or the Northern Ireland civil rights movement of 1967 to 1972. Most notably, we can look at the nonviolent movement of the Moriori people of New Zealand in the face of the Taranaki invasion. And so this is I don't mean to litigate and go back into every historical example and get into the weeds with that. And I'm sure that, and I also want to make clear that this argument that I'm bringing, this is an argument that's out there among some scholars and historians. I'm sure people listening to this that have access to other information, have their own narratives, might dispute part of this, and that would be a whole separate side conversation. But with these historical examples, it's to just give a reference point that this stuff is very messy, and sometimes the situation that's happening in real time and on the ground then gets kind of cleaned up and sanitized in the way we look back at it later, and just remembering kind of the main the parts of the narrative that we might like to remember. And so this then shines a light on the relation between the short term, we could say, advantages or strategies of force, and the long term strategies of nonviolence, communication, being able to understand each other. And so with that, the question comes: is there can there be a relationship to a short term aspect to the use of force in opening up and then having a nonviolent movement side by side, that which then can gain more relevance, can be seen as a more rational actor, can be listened to, can kind of force the authorities um, to have to listen to it, because it's a obviously, you're, as an authority, if you don't have any reason to want to talk to minorities that are protesting oppression, if you're forced to the table, you're going to want to talk to those more reasonable actors that are trying to calm their own communities down and to find a reasonable solution than those that have weapons in their hand. That would be an obvious solution. And so sometimes it can kind of drive and force that engagement that otherwise wouldn't be there. So just in looking at some of those historical examples, looking at what's happening in Myanmar, if you could comment on that and expand on how you see this relation between the short term decisions to engage in force side by side, a potentially more long term vision of a peaceful and nonviolent society that lives in harmony with different communities can come together and still live in harmony in that diversity.
Yes, for this question, I totally agree that all the movement comprises the components of violence and non-violence mixing. It is really it's impossible to just have a like purely non-violent or purely armed resistance. They're always mixing, and we try to generalize upon which has met greater influence on the whole movement. So that's how normally history determine non-violence or violence, but still there are always components of the other dimension. And again, like I try to say repeatedly that it is understandable to use non-violence. I'm not trying to be against or anti of like armed resistance, because that's not non-violence. Non-violence is solving the root cause of violence only, and 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 it is reasonable for people to choose violence when they feel there's no other ways to do. And like Gandhi said, like between violence and cowardice, he would choose violence. So so that's always there in the in the nonviolence thinking, that to appreciate the like nonviolence is not just like supporting to be like doing nothing or like not doing violence, but it's about try to find way to proactively solve the root cause. So in that sense, that like the armed resistance and nonviolence are not necessarily conflicting or against each other. Like it could there are many ways that could be incorporates each other. But the thing is, when we communicate, when we try to mobilize nonviolence movement, it's about the people. It's using most of the time the power of the general civilian. So when the in like in terms of visions, these movement can be like supporting each other, but in terms of planning and organizing, it's always better to be separate. Like whatever way,
Okay.
the leader should be separate, or even like Nelson Mandela, he tried to separate with the different entities, but still they are on the same branch like ANC. But gradually he stopped that armed resistance. So like yeah, it's better to be separate. If it is confused, it's like the essence of nonviolent communication, the essence of the civilian people are somehow blur, and then it's easier for the other side to oppress, in association with armed resistance. So like also people become more fear, like what happened in CDM right now. Like actually CDM is a non-violent movement. They should not be fear. The maximum operation that the military can do is like the firing up and getting some fines. But now people are like CDM movement like confused, like mixing with the armed resistance. Everyone fear. So like military, they have a lot of advantage on that. Like they can insert fear with a like a minimum effort. So like that's what happened if you if this movement are confusing in operational level. So that's what I understand, these things, and that's what also happening in Myanmar. So that's something we need to think about. And also, yes, true that like there are lots of movement that doesn't succeed. Yes, true. Like we can see like 1888, we can see there is some progress. Like a saffron revolution, there's some progress, but it's not reaching to the end. Also, other movement they get oppressed, and like what happened in the Spring Revolution in the early days, like brutally oppressed, and people might think there is no results. But the thing is, um, yeah, for us it is the movement is not just like the people coming on the street. The movement is also happening from the stage. People start thinking, people start organizing, people start talking to do these things. And when the people, these are the more important and then deeper elements of nonviolence resistance, and these are the things that still contributing. So for example, like lots of people think the efforts that have done in the like at the early days of the anti-coup movements are wasted, but still there are a lot that is contributing to current movement. Like people consciousness has been awakened, people become more solidified and like united. And also that lots of defectors are, if you interview them, lots of people are defected because of this civic movement, not for the armed resistance. Like these days, maybe there are like more people like deserted and drop their weapons because of their fears. But in the early days, like in the past 2 years, 3 years, most of the defectors who are joining in the revolution actively, they are coming. They have been awakened from the people power movement. So my point is, yes, if we see like single event, there are lots of cases that doesn't contribute to the end result, but still there are always in nonviolence, the advantages, like there's always this people mindset shift that matters, and that long lasting effects. There's a long lasting effect in that. And also um, there is no harms. That's also important aspect. Like in arm resistance, yes, like that's another question about using force. That's a question also we are internally debating most of the time, like whether we should agree like using force or not. The thing is like um, um, non-violence from time to time in many of the movements, people using force to communicate. So even like in the Buddhist literature, like the Buddha used sometimes he used power to first show his ability and then convince, like communicate later. So like these are like way that we can see in the Buddhist literature also. So but the thing I think the most important part is like to be mindful use of force. Like it is like we need to abandon all the force, like that also not practical. And also it's really hard to define where to draw the force. But we need, I think what most important is like we need to have a clear and mindful intentions of how and why we are using forces. Because when we get the power, like the example in the like the previous example of Dawn San Suu Kyi, when you get the forces, when you have the ability to use forces, when you have the power, you have a it's a very significant chance to deviate your lines of thinking, your original approach, your intentions. So that's one thing. Another thing, when you do violence, especially harming and physical violence and damage to other killings, you also kind of sacrifice a part of yourself. Like so, like this is like it's not just defensive. Yes, I understand there's a defensive reason, but more like it's not easy to kill a person. It's not easy to kill another human beings, and that's affecting to the soul. So like you need to very clear about that. So like I worry about that part, that transition, that transformations or using of force and violence could reach to could deviate from the original ambitions, original visions, and that happens quite frequently. So that things need to be careful. We don't need to be addicted with force. We need to be like the truth should come before the force. The vision should come before the force. The intention, the good intention should come before the forces. So that's the important part, I think.
That's a really honest answer. I really appreciate that, and it's I think it should engender a lot of trust in the listeners for what you're saying, because I think a different response could have been a more kind of sugar-coated, superficial response of the primacy of nonviolence in every situation that was divorced from the actual reality that sometimes we face of how messy and convoluted and tricky these things could be. And I think that that answer shows kind of the depth of how you're wrestling with this, not just in Myanmar, but historically as well. So I really appreciate that. I want to touch upon one thing you talked about with CDM, where you expressed a danger of association between um, uh, uh, CDM at its core, which was not going to being a government servant in some capacity, and not going to your office to uh, not recognize the legitimacy of the military regime, and the danger if that in any way gets aligned with any kind of violent apparatus or movement or even support, that it kind of soils or damages or endangers really that movement. I would push back somewhat. And I think this is also where we come to the distinction of what you find in the Burmese military regime in Myanmar today, and that example, and how that aligns with like Nazi Germany and North Korea versus the examples of some of these other places. That these are fundamentally different societies. And where I would push back is in saying that, as we well know in Myanmar, you don't have to be an armed combatant to face persecution and even death at the hands of the military. You don't even have to be someone who isn't committing violence but just advocating it or supporting it in certain ways. There are people who have liked Facebook posts and have gone to prison for liking a Facebook post that is simply supporting the NUG. You can use NUG Pay and you can go to prison. You can have a truck full of medicine that you're bringing to an IDP camp, and that could put you in prison. You could do none of this, and you could just simply be in your own home. You could lose your home and end up in an IDP camp. You could be in your school. You could be a monk at a monastery. On and on and on. We know all these stories, all these cases, all too well. It's disgusting, and it's tragic, and it's awful. But the point is that there's no safety. None of this keeps you safe. So if you're talking about a rational, logical actor who you can predict how they're going to behave and that they're acting in their own interests, then yes, maybe you can say that um, that uh, that the people that are supporting a certain kind of armed resistance are going to get this kind of punishment, but those that are resisting in other ways, or really separating themselves from those that are advocating force, that they will be treated differently by some authorities, maybe by the British colonial authority in India, maybe by um, certain parts of the American government during the civil rights movement. Maybe you can make that case. Of course, I mean, we can get more into the weeds and nuance. Of course, that's not totally true. There are problems there as well. But the point being that, again, going to Nazi Germany or North Korea or the military regime in Myanmar, that they don't distinguish this way. They don't make these types of distinctions. They, as we well know, they are a brutal force which is going to raid and punish and pillage and murder as they like. And so one of the flaws I kind of see in this argument, or this concern, is that this is assuming some kind of humane and logical and rational actor, which I don't see the military as being. I'm sure this is also not the first time you've heard this criticism. So how do you usually respond when this concern comes up?
Okay. First of all, like in this podcast, like I think I don't talk much about the evilness of military, the brutality of military. I talk more about criticisms and arguments and like conflicting thoughts about the mainstream movement, because for me, I think it is important to talk in the close in the from the closer cycle, because that's the agent that's the these are the change agents. And military, I think, is a little bit far from my reach. But yes, it's, if like everyone does these days, it's if we talk about military evilness and brutality, it's limitless. That's I have no reason to like that's I had enough of, like, and it's true. It's evidently true. But the thing is how I just want to think like one step further, like how to solve that, how to find ways. So like you mentioned, like military as a like kind of in association, like in as you mentioned, you like Nazi Germany and North Korea, you try to like see military as the same compartment. For me, it's there's always different contexts, and that the thing is like what we need to see is like there are always military is not just one people. There are like a lots of people working together. So we need to have, there's if there's a lots of people working together, there needs to be always conflicts, conflicts of idea, conflicts of thoughts, conflicts of power. So, but military seems to be very rigid, standing for like several decades. We need to see why and why. What are the things that make military still standing these days? Um, and and the thing is like as you mentioned in like Nazi Germany and North Korea, they can oppress, they can use force, they can violence in a way that people can agree. Maybe not most people, but inner circle and the people supporting them agreed them. So that's the way, that's called enabler. So this is the enabling factors that military can do. So that's how, we need to also I'm thinking why that happened. So why that happened is because the military try to, rather than saying about the internal injustice, actually military doing a lot of unfair and like violation to its own people, like I mean the soldiers and the people surrounding them, like only a branch of people getting like an equal power. But the thing is they try to legitimate this by trying to point out the external threats, like to try to put fear into people. So that's how normal dictatorships work. And so um like for the revolution movement, if we want to really breaking down the military or changing them into a new way, we need to see this revolution movement as not just as a threat, not a threat to destroy each and every one of them, but try to unite and forming a better future for them. Then the military have a very limited power to use oppressions, because when you oppress, there's always resisting force there. This is like a Newton laws of like action and reaction, like laws of forces. So but the thing is like when there is a oppression, there's always resistance from the people. But the thing is how can we use this resistant power effectively? It's the criteria, it's a success factor of of whether a non-violence movement or like armed resistance movement succeed or not. So like these this like like in the past 3 years, we have seen the military oppress a lot. Like that, then people also that make people. For some people, they lose hope and they try to give up. But most of the people, they become more convinced that they need to resist the revolution. So the military itself is the main source of this movement. But we need to have a direction of this, how to how to use these forces, how to use this the resistant power effectively and in a sustained way. Myanmar is as you know, is a country with the longest civil war in the world, the ongoing civil war in the world, and to change that, we need to see the complexity and the internal divisions of the forces, even among each entity. Like for military, there's always inside. There's not one people. There's always a combinations of people with different ambitions, and we need to see which people we want to empower and which people we want to disencouraged. So this kinds of like seeing in a very analytic level, like even a person, there's like good intentions and bad intention and evil thoughts. So like right now everyone thinking as a rigid entity, like military is one, like there's only one, there's like everyone must be the same thinking, the same approach, like the same model like revolutionary force, like every revolutionary force must be the same, they have the good intention. Like these kinds of very rigid reductionist thinking is problematic, that creating to a too extreme power battle rather than creating a very nuanced and like diverse approach to carry out, because most of the time nonviolence movement is focused on diverse actions and embracing the power of different layers of people. So I think we need to be diverse, the power entity, and seeing this as a not just a one identity, and seeing as a different ideology, different power, different people, different thoughts, different motives, different stories, and combining and conflicting each other. And on that approach, then we can find which ways and which story, which people, which thoughts, and it can be a better way, and we can convey it to that level. And that on that approach, we don't need to fear much. Of course, we need to be, as a person, we don't want to be painful, we don't want to be threatened, we don't want to be get killed. But if we clear of this how to use these forces, we can use the military operation as a power to mobilize the resistance. Right now the military oppress a lot, but we have, of course, people also resist a lot, like people resist, um, but they that power, that forces of the people need to be somehow collected in a bigger picture, in a bigger story. Then I think we don't need to talk much about military. Yes, I understand a lot of people talk about military, it's brutal, that's why we don't need to do, we cannot do that. That's somehow, I think, that's somehow losing our own agency, what we can do, what we can bring changes. So we cannot, for me, that's why I don't focus much about military, even though I consider as an actor, but that what matter is like from where we start change, like from inside, from ourselves, from the people closest to us, or the people who seems aligned with our visions. So that part is more important, because the force is already there right now. There are lots of force. Actually, the force are even larger than the military existent. But the problem right now I think that the current movement facing is we don't have a we don't have a solution to work together these different forces of the counter repressive to the military oppressions.
I appreciate you taking all the time to answer these questions. I have just a few more, as I'm conscious of your time and trying to also bring the common concerns and misunderstandings that we've heard voiced about nonviolence at this current time. And another one to give voice to would be the argument people have made that, like, look, we've uh, obviously 1988 did have some violence on the part of the protesters and activists, but if you look at the 2007 saffron revolution, I mean, could you find a more beautiful example than Buddhist monks marching in unison to Shwedagon Pagoda in downtown Yangon, chanting the Metta Sutta, chanting, wishing for all beings to be happy, for all beings to be safe, and having lay supporters, Buddhists as well as non-Buddhists, that are shielding them from violence on either side as they walk down. And then, of course, we see the absolutely brutal response that comes in the middle of the night of just these horrific accounts of death and murder and violence that occur in monasteries. To be able to shut that down, followed by really a intentional perversion propaganda campaign um, to ensure that doesn't happen again by getting into the Sangha, and we have 969 develop and the anti-Islam movement, and then looking after the 2021 coup that there was a sustained nonviolent manifestation, again chanting metta of promoting nonviolence at every level, and I mean just having, and it was just remarkable, and it's something that to this day it's bothersome that this is not known around the world for just how incredible this was. I mean, you had masses of people, you had thousands of people that were just organically taking to the streets, and the organization was impeccable, and there were people, we interviewed some of them, there were people that were that were just, everyone kind of found their role. There were people that were playing music. There were people that were picking up trash. There were people that were making food for free. There were there were others that were were making sure there was enough sanitation and food and water and such. And so you had this incredible organic movement like nothing I've ever seen or ever heard of around the world, where there when you have that many people together and when you have that many emotions at play, it's really difficult to keep that kind of all in check. There are some bad actors or some people who get kind of emotional in the moment or mob mentality. And then to make things worse, then you have the military actually trying to instigate violence by, as they usually do, by having thugs that are dressed up as something else to try to provoke people to violence. And that doesn't work. I mean, there were stories of these drunken or drugged people sent by the military to go terrorize you, stabbing people with knives in the crowds, or going to poison water supplies, or just these terrible things. And there's stories of these people being detained but not punished, just detained and bound so they don't cause harm, but not attacked violently. And so, when you look at the examples of the Saffron Revolution and those early days in the 2021 protests, there have been voices that say, look, going back to what we said before, like, what else do you want us to try? What other examples do you need? Like, look at what was done in the Saffron Revolution and look at what was done in the first several weeks or months of the protests after the military coup, and tell us what precedents you can find anywhere from around the world, anywhere historically, that can compete with the nobility and the mission and the ethics of what was happening in these two instances. And look at the military's playbook every single time. It's not working. And so I'm not saying this from my voice. I'm not I'm conjuring up voices that I've heard so many times, and I'm sure you've heard, that have pointed to these incidents and saying, like, look, this has been tried, and this is the result every time. We need to adapt and innovate. And so, when you look at these historical examples from your own country and how they occurred, and yet you're willing to still invest and still try, where how do you respond to that criticism? Because I'm sure that's another thing that you've heard very often.
Yes, thank you for the reflection of our past movements. And these are really powerful, as you mentioned, really inspiring and remarkable, truly remarkable. I somehow feel like I'm very pessimistic these days, like in this conversation, because I normally try to criticize a lot. But yeah, I of course, I, as a non-violence believer, I I I see the importance and the power of these movements still linking to these days. And but still, yes, this conversation is thinking about the gap that we have and seeing from different angles. So I would like to argue again, like try to see what are the missing points, even though there are lots of, like as I also mentioned before, there are lots of um, results happening at the time and also till now. Um, yes, one of the things that I feel kind of um, uh, people like pay less attention is that um, people focus on the movement, but people rarely think about creating a strategy or the sustained movement plan, like organizational structures, like how to convene. So like comparing with the colonial civil resistance movement at the time, also starting from like 1920, there's a pro-nationalist, pro-Buddhist movement coming like from lots of like nationalist organization. These are also non-violent movement. They come as not just an event. There are also lots of protest, strike, lots of movement. They are trying to resist against the British colonial, but they try to form as a structure like alternative education system, alternative organization. They create a lot of them. Most of them are in have no affiliation with the armed resistance. So like that's also an important part. So that's why they can sustain they can build their legitimacy by the people power And if, of course, the British want to kind of repress that, but if you repress that, they give a larger, they have to sacrifice some of their reputation, some of they damage a lot. So like gradually these movements come with a decades-long plans. And that's still impacting to current Myanmar. Of course, these somehow affecting to like extreme nationalist narratives sometimes, leading to like still empowering. But like these are still, I mean, influential in current Myanmar thinking, current Burmese thinking, current Myanmar society thinking. So these non-violent campaigns are always got impactful, like, and long-lasting. Like 1988, also it has lots of, like, throughout this 70 years long, like all the anti-dictatorial, all the anti-military campaigns made by a lots of groups, pro-democracy actor, ethnic armed groups, a lot of actors. 1988 was considered as one of the most prominent time that is near to the achievement. Like lots of people think that's a turning point, and also it tends like it's contribute to some of the significant changes. Also in like the saffron revolution, are also saying like yes, like after saffron revolutions, there's also a significant change in like the 2000 constitution, 2010 transition happened largely because of the saffron revolutions. Like also people like lots of people like might agree that like the 2021 revolution also thinking that this is a like the early days of like anti-coup movement, thinking that these are the closest moment to achieve the democracy, a pure democracy system. So these are the hope that we have, the most hopeful, inspiring, and the most united time that we have. But the problem is we cannot create a sustained plan. So that's I would like to that's the difference between like the colonial movement. Like for example, like saffron evolution, as you mentioned, lots of monks are involved in like pro-democracy movements because of the trigger point is because of the fuel price rapid rising. So like most of the movement is using 1988. Also, there's a trigger point of like demonetizing of the some of the monetary notes, and then like in 2021 because of the military coup. So these are the like trigger point, and people are kind of awakened. It's like a shock. It's a shock coming. And at the time, the mobilizer, the organizer, the movement leader need to prepare the complete plan, because at the time everyone want to go something. But the thing is, if there is no enough planning for the trip, then it's reached to like different places and cannot succeed. So yes, of course, like many people saying like this movement failed because of the military. I would say yes, military play an important role, but what matter most is like what we can do. What are the things that in our hand that can improve better? Like for military, like even like for the like comparing to the saffron revolution, the military also kind of funded like in the past decades from 2010 to 2020. They try to create a campaign, pro nationalist Mabata campaign with a very sustained strategy, I would say. They create a, like they embedded in the education system, they embedded in the community system, they embedded in the monastery education. They invest a long-term plan. And at that time, most of the pro-democracy activists, they want to fight, but the thing is they cannot engage enough, and they try to limit with the law using power. So that's the difference. They try to oppress, but still this Mabata, like many of the Mabata monks are like detained and warranted, but still this still have a lots of impact on the current legitimacy, current people support for the military. I mean, the core supporter of the military are using this as a way to expand their puppet support. So I see like we cannot see. That's why we cannot see as the movement tie only. We need to see the longer picture, like what are the movement strategy, and then what are the movement planning in terms of organizational structures and in terms of leaderships. So these are the important aspect, I would say. And as you mentioned, yes, like these 2021 revolutions are truly remarkable. The people are really supporting to their best. um, and but there is like lots of weakness in organizational structure, public, like try to open. Even right now, like we cannot open enough public participations. Like right now, lots of people are convincing like people need to walk more, but actually people really want to, like lots of people really want to take part in the revolution. But apart from holding arms and making money, and donation, they have very little role, like maybe clicking and like signing petition, these kinds of things they can do. But apart from that, there's a very limited way that the leadership can show off. That's why I think these are the things that need to be considered. Another problem or another issue that we have facing these days is there's a civil resistance scholars, Erica Chenoweth, once like after 3.5% of the whole population join in the civil resistance movement, the movement is likely to win. But still, Myanmar have lots of like for CDM movement, around half of the civil servant join this strike. So but that doesn't happen. So I also want to figure out what are the factors that's happening. And one of the things is also social media. So social media contribute largely to help people mobilize movement, disseminate information easily. Like just by the post, you can make a protest next, like tomorrow. Like you just need to like very convenient tools, but that also making very easy to breaking down, because once after finishing the protest, people become separated. And like the previous movement, if you want to mobilize a movement, let's say 1,000 or like tens of thousands, you need to really commit it a lot to communicate, to build understanding, to convince. So these hard working really pay off and has a sustained impact. But social media, it's easy to communicate, easy to mobilize, but it's really hard to organize. That's why in CDN, everyone say we are all leaders and we don't need the leaders. In the strike, people say we are all just working, we don't need the strike committee. So like these kind of thing like still continuing, and there's a like leading towards a populist movement in a way that like people can only support in like people can begin only audience like supporting many or clicking like on the social media, but really hard to think about what kinds of participation that we could open up. So like, and there's no strategic like thinking, like because everything is like collectively colluding as one, like the revolution, every arm resistance and civil resistance and like international resistance, everything need to be combined as one part. It's really hard for the ordinary people to join, I would say. So like these kinds of aspects that we need to consider if we want to create a sustained action. So like I would say, like as you mentioned, most of the time people see the visible action, the surface level, like the protest, the action, the direct action, I would say. But what most important is these days, more and more important is like the structures, the strategic thinking, the fiction behind this movement. So like movement itself is in a battle, in a war, it's a battle only, but we need a larger war vision. We need a larger thinking. That's I'm saying repeatedly again and again, but I think that's quite missing in the current thinking.
No, that's brilliant. I really appreciate that, and I really appreciate the focus on participatory action. I love hearing that, and I can understand how after an initial period where it seemed like there was so much creativity and so much involvement in every direction that things have become siloed somewhat, and at the same time, we're also seeing at higher levels, we're seeing greater ethnic participation and collaboration to an extent that we haven't seen so much before, and that's a bright side. But I do think that more conversations, participation on a lower level or a mid-range level, whatever you want to call it, I think is just so valuable. People finding their space, finding their voice, finding their contribution. And, that's also what we hope conversations like these are doing, even though you and I are the only ones talking, and we're talking in real time to an audience that doesn't exist. At some point, that future audience will materialize, and hopefully they will be that third person in the virtual room with us. They will be nodding their heads or arguing with us as sit and listening, as a good conversation will do, and that and moving beyond that to opening up wider conversations that happen in private, that happen between groups. We've done panels before, and we've tried to hold our panels differently than how I often see them online, where they're more like experts that are talking down or leaders that are focused on their vision. We've tried to hold them more as like kind of town halls, where we have we'll have certain panelists that are coming together to talk about their views, but very much wanting it interactive and engaged with the people that are coming to feel like they have a voice and they're able to talk and participate. I just think I can't emphasize that participation element enough, and the value of that. And so I really appreciate that answer. And I want to ask, there's a final question I have. I mean, there's so many more questions I can ask, because this is such an important topic. It's one that, after the initial months, we've really not heard much about. We've heard a lot about the difficult decision of those that have decided a different route, and we've talked with them extensively. But I was really happy when you and your group came on the radar to be able to return back to this very important vision. And I've learned tremendously of many things on my side have been clarified. One final question I have on my mind is, I think what's also kind of unique about this current situation is you basically have these two entities that are fighting for legitimacy. That might even be reductionist to say two entities. It's probably much more than that. But to just simplify it, obviously have the military regime, and then we have some kind of coalition between the old NLD, the NUG, NUCC, the EAOs, EROs, etc., that are trying. They've been called a shadow government. It's not a very nice term, a parallel government. They've been called the legitimate government, many different names and terms. But this is different in the sense that it's not like in many of the other historical examples we're looking at. We're really looking at one regime that is unequivocally holding power, and then a movement that is either trying to uproot them or to at least create greater equity and safety and fairness for a minority community within that place. But this is not exactly what's happening in Myanmar. It's a much messier and more complicated situation. Where I'm going with this is that this other entity, well, you have these two entities, and obviously the military is obviously using violence and terror at every opportunity that it can. But then you have the other entity that, the NUG publicly declared, I think it was called the defensive war. And as this entity that is trying to represent the legitimate governance, it is officially and formally aligned with its own Ministry of Defense, its own military, and of course, as any legitimate ruling authority anywhere, they have at their disposal the means of violence, the means of being able to use police and military to restore order and to use as they see. This is a right of this is considered to be a right and part of the social contract in any country, any society. And so it's not like we can't really compare this to any other situation where there's a movement that is proceeding in a violent way and then another movement which is also in a nonviolent way, and you're kind of looking at these two together because you have this supposedly legitimate authority in the nature of the NUG that has publicly and formally called upon its right to be able to use force to defend itself and defend its people against the military aggression. And so, do you feel somewhat of a complicated or awkward relationship between their formal statement and their Ministry of Defense, PDFs, the AOs, and the actions and the operations that they're undertaking as not as a band or a movement, but as claiming legitimacy in their own right, and your pathway towards nonviolence? How do you see this relationship, and how is that similar or different to some of these historical examples?
So yes, as you mentioned, we can, like, in a reductionist view, we can see there's a two power struggle, like two power entities struggling. From one side there's SAC, from one side there's like coalitions of pro-democratic actors and the elected members of parliaments together. So like this legitimacy um, debate is also, it's very relevant these days also because like just like in the past week, the CRB extended into the unlimited time, and also other regional like CRs, like the regional committee are also trying to draft their own law using their legitimacy. So this for me, I would say like there is something to be considered about this line of thinking about legitimacy as a way to gather public support and also international support to fight against the military dictatorships. because like there's also different ways of defining legitimacy. And like most of the time when we say like legitimacy, we say like there's a de jure that's coming from the public support, and the de facto that's coming out of the real abilities. As you mentioned, in the reductionist way, we can see there is a legitimacy struggle between military and the pro-democracy actors, coalitions led by NUG, NUCC, and CRPH, these kinds of entities. Um, but for me, what I see um, difference with our standpoint to the legitimacy approach is that like we see legitimacy as a way not just about public support, it's about leading towards change, and it's about leadership, it's about thinking about public participations. So right now legitimacy is focusing mainly about we have elected, we have public support on social media, that's why we should rule. Like these kinds of thinking from that base has very limited to create a conversation between different actors to have a unified vision. So that's one problem, because most of the time we are declaring that this revolution is not just about the coup, it's more than that, it's about changing the whole system. We declare like that, but still we are saying that because of that, like we are like um but still, if we are standing on this legitimacy background, which is coming that we should rule, like who should rule on based on public support, then that's creating a divisiveness and also misleading to the international community also, because international community might think like, okay, these are the people who don't get, like they get elected but they don't get power, that's why they want to get their power back. So like this is a one problem I think in that aspect. Another problem is like when we say like social contract and the legitimacy, we say like it's not just like who should rule, it's about the vice versa accountability. So at least like when we want to go to democracy, there needs to be a check and balance power, and also the public rights to the right information. So these kinds of things are kind of missing I think in the current form. Like it's really hard to see the check and balance and the rule of law in the current entities. Like we don't know who is appointing the minister of like defense, who is like which role the president play, or which role the prime minister play, how CRPH or NUCC is like checking and balancing with NUG. We don't know. Like they are just doing with the like they say, because I coming from the elected background, and then we get public support from social media. So this is a legitimacy seen as a public support only has a problem, and it could lead to the populist lines of thinking apart, like leading from like deviating from the democracy. So that one concern that I have. Another thing about the war and NUG, well, I would say like the parallel government thinking, it could be a method, but it is not the solution. The like it's not the one and only solution. So we will try to like collaborate on whatever way we can, but it doesn't mean we think that's the best way, because that coming from the top down thinking, like these members, these people will create um, um, a discussion, the elect actors like the NUG, MOD, or like the ERO, they will discuss and then they will create a vision rather than creating a real radical change, a transformation. Rather than that, they try to think from the power base. So this is really, I think, not productive. Also, this is also trapping, I would say, in the conflicts of power battle in them. And that's how we have seen in the past 3 years. These conversations are like, they always say they have some agreement, but there is no visible significance indicator of like collective vision. So these are the, and more we have clearly seen that everyone want to think about their region only, not in a collective story approach. So like this is the problem, I would say, thinking from the power dynamics. Like it's considering legitimacy would leading towards more power conflict. So we should focus legitimacy as a what kinds of solution that people want, and how can we bring people in the activism. So that's a democratic vision that we should have. Like legitimacy itself is a tools, and if we don't use properly, it could be just a reactive, and it could block our dialogue process.
Thank you for that answer, and thank you for all the time you've taken with us today about this topic, which we've seldom heard from in the last several years, and to know the work that you're doing and this, I think, this critical, really, to shine a light on this critical examination of what this mindset and this movement that is still occurring. We don't hear about this so much given the turn that things have taken, but it's great to know what's out there and to understand it in more detail, and also to just I appreciate you taking on just a slew of hard questions that I'm sure many of which you've heard from before, to really get at this this honest conversation and reflection that allows us to uncover this thinking and methodology to a greater extent. So thank you so much for taking that time. And before we go, is there any last thing you'd like to add?
No, thank you. Thank you so much for your thoughtful conversation and the opportunity today.
နှကိုကျင်းတဲ့အကိုလင်းရဲ့ရုပ်ခင်နွဲ့ကြိုတဲ့လင်းနာရီထိုးပြီးလာပါတော့အခါငါမောမာလာဖို့မျောပေါ်လင်းနာရီထိုးပြီးနှကိုကျင်းတဲ့
We want to take a moment to introduce you to our nonprofit Better Burma's online shop, which features handicrafts sourced from artisan communities scattered throughout Myanmar. Far from being mass-produced knockoffs, the pieces we offer are unique and handmade, reflecting the wide diversity of different peoples found throughout the country. When Myanmar experienced its transition period, moving from democracy in the late 2010s after decades of harsh military dictatorship, many Burmese craftspeople hoped their beautiful work could finally be appreciated beyond the country. When Myanmar experienced its transition period, moving towards democracy in the late 2010s after decades of harsh military dictatorship, many Burmese craftspeople hoped their beautiful work could finally be appreciated beyond the country's borders. But sadly, this was not to be so. Following the military coup, many skilled artisans suddenly found all possibility of continuing their livelihood closed off and began struggling just to feed their families. With this in mind, we prioritize working with artisans from disadvantaged and vulnerable backgrounds because we know just how hard it can be to survive at the margins of society in Myanmar. This includes such people as those with disabilities, mothers who have contracted HIV/AIDS, civil servants on CDM, ethnic and religious minorities, and more. To view these wonderful pieces, please visit alokacrafts.com. That's Aloka, A-L-O-K-A, crafts, C-R-A-F-T-S, one word, alokacrafts.com. Otherwise, please consider a donation through our usual channels. If you would like to join in our mission to support those in Myanmar who are being impacted by the military coup, we welcome your contribution in any form, currency, or transfer method. Your donation will go on to support a wide range of humanitarian and media missions, aiding those local communities who need it most. Donations are directed to such causes as the Civil Disobedience Movement, CDM, families of deceased victims, internally displaced person IDP camps, food for impoverished communities, military defection campaigns, undercover journalists, refugee camps, monasteries and nunneries, education initiatives, the purchasing of protective equipment and medical supplies, COVID relief, and more. We also make sure that our donation fund supports a diverse range of religious and ethnic groups across the country. We invite you to visit our website to learn more about past projects, as well as upcoming needs. You can give a general donation or earmark your contribution to a specific activity or project you would like to support, perhaps even something you heard about in this very episode. All of this humanitarian work is carried out by our nonprofit mission, Better Burma. Any donation you give on our Insight Myanmar website is directed towards this fund. Alternatively, you can also visit the Better Burma website, betterburma.org, and donate directly there. In either case, your donation goes to the same cause in both websites except credit card. You can also give via PayPal by going to paypal.me/betterburma. Additionally, we can take donations through Patreon, Venmo, GoFundMe, and Cash App. Simply search Better Burma on each platform and you'll find our account. You can also visit either website for specific links to these respective accounts or email us at info@betterburma.org. That's Better Burma, one word, spelled BETTERBURMA.org. If you would like to give in another way, please contact us. We also invite you to check out our range of handicrafts that are sourced from vulnerable artisan communities across Myanmar, available at alokacrafts.com. Any purchase will not only support these artisan communities, but also our nonprofit's wider mission. That's Aloka Crafts, spelled ALOKACRAFTS, one word, alokacrafts.com. Thank you so much for your kind consideration and support.
What about Yarananga Unyana, Dadu Yadana Birigani Zadamana, we got a Besayana, Besayo. Oba Yarananda, Dayananga, Yaranaya, Dayanam, Boda, Yaranam.